70 to 80% of the way through. Now I know Sixth Sense has talked about this. This is sort of now common knowledge. But 70 to 80% of the way through, the buyers will either come in inbound or download a form or watch a webcast or raise their hand and say, I'd like to talk. Come in on the website and say, sort of, I need pricing, or I have additional tech questions. That is the beginning of the sales process. So to your question, how do we uncover these buyers? How do we identify who they are? And more importantly, how do we get in front of them? Buyers have specific questions that they need answered. The oldest millennial is now about 47-ish years old, right? I say it all the time. Millennials, those decision makers, they're sort of in the traditional sense, those decision makers in the consensus buying groups, they're super comfortable with tech. They're increasingly more comfortable with low code, no code. They can read and comprehend large swaths of information, which means if we present them sort of the right content throughout their buying journey, and watch for their signals. That's the how part. Watch for all of their signals of engagement. Then we will know with a certain level of clarity where they are in their decision-making process and what comes next. When they're ready to speak to us, when that sort of dark journey ends and the light journey begins, right? The proverbial 20% on this chart. More often than not, they will have two questions. I need pricing, or I have tech questions that your website or your materials are not being able to answer. Those are super, super good signals. In fact, this is exactly what we want to happen in the traditional, in the modern buying journey. We will present to them all the appropriate content. If the content's really good, it still hooks the buyer. It answers their questions with a level of clarity, and invites them to come in and bound. And that's what I see in our backend all the time. And in fact, those inbound signals are often not singular inbound systems. I often see inbound happening multiple times in the same accounts. So the buyers are continuing to do that research. Different buyers are quote unquote uncovering themselves, filling out forms, coming in on the website, asking questions. And I think that one of the worst things as marketers that we can do is seeing one signal, form download, bam, they're inbound. I'm going to throw them to my SDR team, and I'm going to start slamming their inbox with all sorts of non-personalized messages. You've just lost the buyer. Our job is to listen, watch for the signals after having present the right content, and then continue the conversation with the buyer until such time they're ready to make that decision.
Yeah, it's so challenging. Like you say, the signal, watching that signal and how it's changed is so critical. I know in my own experience, when a buyer comes to me and right out of the jump asks about price, I feel like I'm really late in the process, or they've already shortlisted somebody else and they've already got a price.
Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that question is the very first question that they're asking of you and your brand. They've already done their research. You just haven't seen it. You just haven't seen those signals, and that's okay. But that is a super important signal to listen to.
Yeah, and if I guess I was just thinking, reflecting on my own experience, if there's a way to kind of tease out a little bit about how they arrived at that question, that would be helpful, because I know some vendors put the pricing like right on Main Street, like for a smaller SaaS purchase, it's right on their web page of here's what you can expect. A lot of them that are bigger or target the enterprise don't. They'll say, call or contact. So, how do you balance that out? I mean, that's a tricky balance, but you're right. The signals are changing here. and perhaps it's salesperson has to adopt differently for situation.
Yeah, I
So
think the
yeah,
salesperson is, but in particularly for a smaller SMB SaaS company for whom the pricing might be right on the website, um, is quickly becoming a solution consultant, right?
yes, yeah,
Less so a salesperson, because you've presented everything you need to present to the buyer right at the very front. Much of that dark journey can often be short circuited.
yep,
But for a big tech decision that requires increasingly complex buying journey, many people on that buying committee, um, this graphic will apply probably more and more. And this next data point really, thanks to Sixth Sense, who shares and continues to share their research with all of us. This and also Trust Radius has recently come out with a new research. I think they published it mid-April of this year. They did a lot with AI and discoverability on that research. I sat with Alison Havener, their CMO, on the webcast, kind of geeking out on that research as well. So for the listeners here, you can find that on my LinkedIn page. But what it means for what all of that research really means for marketers, that we can't sit back and just really focus on the buyer's journey or the sales funnel or anywhere sort of in between. We can't just say, I'm just going to do top of funnel. My KPI this year is going to be top of funnel. Or I'm just going to do bottom of funnel. My KPI this year is going to be we can't afford to do that anymore. We really have to float all the way up to discoverability. So discoverability is the term that Trust Radius came up with in that research. Please do look it up. It's fantastic research. Really working through how do brands discover you, and also realizing that LLMs are taking an increasingly bigger share of that discoverability puzzle. So how do we make sure that we're not just working towards SEO, we're also working towards GEO, and that when the buyer is asking, ChatGPT or whatever LLM they're on, a question, we get to influence what the answer is on the receiving end. So that's one part. So float all the way up to discoverability so that your brand has even a chance to get on the day one shortlist. And in terms of the day one shortlist, again, thanks to research from Sixth Sense, do look that up as well. The research is if you are still the top vendor, the buyer is reaching out to coming out of that dark funnel. So a typical 47-year-old millennial buyer, I've done all my research. I've read a gazillion white papers, and I've asked ChatGPT a million questions. My day one shortlist was 4 companies. I now have 3 companies I want to touch base with. So I'm going to go on their website and fill out a form, ask for a callback. If you're the very first company that they're filling out a form for, then you have an 84% chance of winning that deal. Those are pretty awesome stats. All of us would love to be part of that 84% chance. But that means sort of going backwards from there, orchestrating that buyer journey really well so that your content really stands out and you're really answering their questions. And you're not just parroting a million blogs out there. That's something that we can't afford to do. And then going even further than that, even sort of upstream than that, brand to demand, incredibly important, right? Make sure that our brand is appropriately represented in that day one shortlist, and even earlier than that in discoverability. That when a buyer is asking questions about their purchase, our brand comes up at the top.
yeah.
I know
You bring
that's
up a
easy,
really
but I think that's marketing 101, right? That's kind of
right.
what we learned in quote unquote marketing school.
Yeah, in theory, yes.
In theory.
You're you bring up a lot of good points there about being on that day one short list, and I was sitting in the Marketing Institute. They had a day long event yesterday, and John Miller presented and said that same thing of you really have to be one of those shortlist providers, or, not only has a short list become shorter, but the importance to get to that short list has become more critical. And he was saying that the measurement should kind of, pivot in that direction. But before we get into measurement, because I know we're approaching the bottom of the hour here, I did want to double click into what you said about the sales skill sets changing as well, where in times past, uh, you could probably have a salesperson who would either control the flow of information. That was maybe 20 years ago. 10 years ago, you had a lot of inbound and a lot of people just following up on inbound. Now, pivoting to having the consulting background of sellers as part of your product, that's a skill set, and a skill set that some less tenured reps may not necessarily have right out of the jump. But to your point, that is the level of engagement that a prospect is looking to buy at now, because they're further down the funnel. So because they're further down the funnel, they expect to have that solution
Mhm.
consulting experience. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say as you're talking about that solution consulting becomes a lot more important than the pure selling. Am I hearing you right on that?
Yeah, 100%. And also, I would add one more to that. If you're a seller listening to this call, please reach out to your marketing team. Please get on the same page, because if you're able to sort of speak that buyer language, um, then the conversation will be so much easier. If you're able to go into that conversation with that CMO, that CRO, that chief of product, and really be able to sort of discern, here's the research. I know your world. I know who you are trying to sell to. I know these B2B buyers, and be able to sort of coherently present this as a point of conversation for them. Tell them something they don't already know. Put it in a very simplified format for them. Then you're elevating yourself to a point of a partner rather than a seller. So call your marketing partner.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Of that elevation is really critical. I know we only have a couple minutes left, and we wanted to briefly talk about the measurement side. And I think we were kind of talking about this in a way where I was sharing that John had mentioned. I think his point of view is we should be measured on that short list. How often are we getting on that short list? Do you have a point of view on measurement? I mean, we obviously have a point of view because we do this, but I'm curious what your observation is on measurement.
I look at it very simply. I think from a cohesive, combined go-to-market team, if you as a company want to measure whatever you're calling it, MQLs, SQLs, somewhere in between, Mickey Mouse, Santa Claus, I don't really care what you call it, but just make sure that you have a point of reference that you can consistently and cohesively measure year over year over year, so that you know what your KPIs are, and so that you know if you're making any improvements or not. That is really my recommendation to my CMO friends, to my marketing friends out there. Just be consistent with your measurement. Um, I think my second, if I'm able to geek out on this a little bit, uh, we yes, we can measure the world. We probably have measurements on every single data point in our marketing universe, but much of that does not need to float up to the C-suite, to the CEO. Find out what your CEO cares about and present those metrics. But again, consistently, month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year, so that you know what those things are and if you're moving the needle.
Yeah, I violently agree with you on the consistency. Definitions matter there. Process matters a whole lot, and simplicity, as you said, too. Really, I was on a recent prospect call and we were showing off a dashboard, and we explained those very same concepts because they're like, "Oh, where's this and where's the multi-touch and all this?" And I'm like, "Well, hang on. Very few times have we seen multi-touch attribution leading to a higher quality decision until you get the fundamentals in place. Like, just get the fundamentals, some consistency, do last touch. It may not be optimal, but at least you have something, and just measure it and improve on it. And the revenue will go up if you take that same same approach of the consistency and the definitions. And if you're a new person, that's the opportunity to change things and to question it. Where you can move the goalposts a little bit because you're the new person. You got the new gal or guy card that you can play
New
entering
car
into a
smell. You've got
scenario.
the new car smell for about 6
Yeah,
months.
exactly. So you have the opportunity then to question it, and that really should be the opportunity to question it. But after that, you lock and load and try to keep what you have, and the board would appreciate that too. They don't want to be interpreting all these different measurements, or just have the same approach, and ideally collapse it between sales and marketing so you're not reporting on two different things, and that's a whole nother
Absolutely.
conversation.